Dreams of Trespass, Chapter 4. Yasmina's first co-wife. When Lella Thor heard that Yasmina had named a duck after her, she was outraged. She summoned grandfather Tezi to her saloon, which was actually a self-contained palace with an internal garden, a large fountain, and a glorious 10-meter-long wall covered with Venetian glass. Grandfather came in reluctantly, walking with long strides and holding a Quran in his hand, as if to show that he had been interrupted in his reading. He was wearing his usual loose white cotton pants, his white cotton chiffon qamis and farajiyya, and his yellow leather slippers. In the house, he never wore jillaba, except when hosting visitors. Physically, grandfather had the typical look of the northern of the Reef region, where his family had originated. He was tall and lanky, with an angular face, fair skin, light and rather small eyes, and a very distant, haughty air. People from the Reef are proud and not very talkative, and grandfather hated it when his wives argued or provoked conflict of any kind. Once he stopped speaking to Yasmina for a whole year, leaving the room whenever she entered it because she had instigated 2 disputes in a single month. After that, she could not afford to be involved in more than one fight every 3 years. This time it was the duck, and the whole farm was altered. Lella Thor offered grandfather tea before attacking the subject. Then she threatened to leave him if the duck's name was not changed at once. It was the eve of a religious festival, and Lella Thor was dressed to the hilt, wearing her tiara and her legendary kaftan, embroidered with genuine pearls and garnets to remind everyone of her privileged status. But grandfather was apparently quite amused by the whole affair, because he smiled when the subject of the duck came up. He had always found Yasmina to be quite eccentric, and had in fact needed a long time to get used to some of her habits, such as climbing up trees and hanging up there for hours at a time. Sometimes she even managed to talk a few co-wives into joining her, and then they would have tea served all around while sitting on the branches. But what always saved Yasmina was the fact that she made grandfather laugh, and that was the real achievement, for he was a rather moody person. Now, caught in Lella Thor's luxurious salon, grandfather sillily suggested that she retaliate by naming her ugly dog Yasmina. That would force the rebel to rename her duck. But Lella Thor was not in the mood for jokes. "You are completely under Yasmina's spell," she shouted. "If you let her get away with this today, tomorrow she will buy a donkey and name it Sidi Tezi. This woman does not respect hierarchies. She is a troublemaker, like everyone from the Atlas Mountains, and she is bringing chaos to this decent house. Either she gives her duck another name or I am leaving. I don't understand the influence she has on you. It's not as if she were beautiful. She's so skinny and tall, like an ugly giraffe." It was true that Yasmina did not fit the beauty standards of her day, of which Lella Thor was a perfect model. Lella Thor had a very white skin, a round face like the full moon, and a lot of flesh all around, especially on her hips and buttocks and bust. Yasmina, on the other hand, had the brown, sun-tanned skin of the mountaineers, a long face with strickling high cheekbones, and hardly any bust. She stood almost 180 centimeters tall, which was just a little shorter than grandfather, and had the longest legs you've ever seen, which was why she was so good at climbing trees and performing all kinds of acrobatic stunts. But her legs did look like sticks under her kaftan. To camouflage them, she sewed herself an enormous pair of sarwals, or harim pants, with many pleats. She also cut long slits in the side of her short kaftan to give herself some volume. At first, Lella Thor tried to get everyone to laugh at Yasmina's innovative dress, but very soon all the other co-wives were imitating the rebel because the slits, shortened kaftans, gave them a lot more freedom of movement. When grandfather went to Yasmina to complain about the duck, she showed little sympathy. So what if Lella did leave? She said. He would he would never feel lonely. You will still have 8 concubines to take care of you. So grandfather tried to bribe Yasmina by offering her a heavy silver bracelet from Tiznit, in exchange for which she had to make a couscous with her duck. Yasmina kept the bracelet and told him that she needed a few days to think things over. Then, the following Friday, she came back with a counter-proposal. She could not possibly kill the duck because its name was Lalathor. It would not be a good omen. However, she could promise never to call her the duck by its name in public. She would do so only in her mind. From then on, I was instructed to do the same, and I worked very hard to keep the duck's name to myself. Then, there was the story of King Farouk, the farm peacock, who would name a peacock after the famous ruler of Egypt. What was the pharaoh doing on the farm? Well, you see, Yasmina and her co-wives did not like the Egyptian king, for he kept threatening to repudiate his lovely wife, Princess Farida, whom he did eventually divorce in January 1948. Just what had brought the couple to this impasse? What unforgivable crime had she committed? She had given birth to 3 daughters, none of whom could accede to the throne. According to Muslim law, a woman cannot rule a country, although that had happened a few centuries ago, grandmother said. With the help of the Turkish army, Shajarat al-Dur had acceded the throne of Egypt after the death of her husband, Sultan al-Salih. She was a concubine, a slave of Turkish origin, and she ruled for 4 months, governing neither better nor worse than the men who came before her and after her. But of course, not all Muslim women are as astute or cruel as Shajarat al-Dur. When Shajarat al-Dur's second husband decided to take a second wife, for example, she waited until he got into the hammam or bath to relax and then forgot to open the door. Of course, he died from the steam and the heat. But poor Princess Farida was not such a perfect criminal, and she did not know how to maneuver in power circles or defend her rights in the palace. She was of very modest origins, and was somewhat helpless, too, which was why the co-wives of the farm who had similar backgrounds of hers loved her and suffered for her humiliations. There is nothing so humiliating for a woman, Yasmina said, as being cast out. Shulup, right into the street like a cat. Is that a decent way to treat a woman? Besides, Yasmina added, as high and mighty as King Farouk was, he did not know much about how babies were made. If he did, she said, he would know that his wife was not responsible for not having a boy. You need 2 to make a baby. And she was right about that, I knew. To make babies, the bride and the groom had to dress nicely, put flowers in their hair, and lay down together on a very big bed. The next thing you knew, many mornings later, there was a little baby crawling between them. The farm kept track of King Farouk's conjugal caprices through Radio Cairo, and Yasmina's condemnation of him was swift and decisive. What kind of good Muslim leader, she said, dismisses a wife just because she does not produce a son? Allah alone, says the Quran, is responsible for the sex of babies. In a justly run Muslim Cairo, King Farouk would be dismissed from the throne. Poor lovely Princess Farida, sacrificed through sheer ignorance and vanity. Egyptians should repudiate their king. And that is how the farm peacock came to be called King Farouk. But if condemning kings was an easy matter for Yasmina, dealing with a powerful co-wife was another matter altogether, even after already having gotten away with naming a duck after her rival. Lalathor was powerful, and she was the only aristocratic city-born wife of grandfather Tazi. Her last name also was Tazi, as she was one of his cousins, and she had brought with her a dowry, a tiara of emeralds, sapphires, and grey pearls, which was kept in the big, strong box in the right-hand corner of the men's saloon. But Yasmina, who was from from a modest rural background like all the other co-wives, was not impressed. I cannot consider someone superior just because she owns a tiara, she said. Besides, as rich as she is still stuck in a harem, just like me. I asked Yasmina what that meant, to be stuck in a harem, and she gave me several different answers, which of course only confused me. Sometimes, she said, to be stuck in a harem simply means that a woman had lost her freedom of movement. Other times, she said, that a harem meant misfortune because a woman had to share her husband with many others. Yasmina herself had to share grandfather with 8 co-wives, which meant that she had to sleep alone for 8 nights before she could hug and snuggle with him for one. And hugging and snuggling your husband is wonderful, she said. I am so happy your generation will not have to share husbands anymore. The nationalists who were fighting the French had promised to create a new Morocco with equality for all. Every woman was to have the same right to education as a man, as well as the right to enjoy monogamy, a privileged exclusive relationship with her husband. In fact, many of the nationalist leaders and their followers in Fez already had only one wife, and looked down on those who had many. Father and uncle, who opposed the nationalist views, had each only one wife. The nationalists also were against slavery. Slavery had been prevalent in Morocco at the beginning of the century, Yasmina said, even after the French had made it illegal, and many of her co-wives have been brought in slave market. Yasmina also said that all human beings were equal, no matter how much money they had, where they came from, what place they held in the hierarchy, or what their religion or language was. If you had 2 eyes, 1 nose, 2 legs, and 2 hands, then you were equal to everyone else. I reminded her that if we counted a dog's 4 legs as hand, he would be our equal too. And she immediately responded with, "But of course he is our equal. Animals are just like us. The only thing they lack is speech." Some of Yasmina's co-wives who had been slaves had come from foreign lands, like Sudan, but others had been stolen from their parents right in Morocco during the chaos that ensued after the arrival of the French in 1912. When the Mukhzin, or the state, does not express the will of the people, Yasmina said, women always pay a high price, because insecurity and violence set in. That's exactly what happened then. The Mukhzin and its officials, unable to face the French armies, signed the treaty which gave France the right to rule Morocco as protectorate, but the people refused to give up. Resistance sprang up in the mountains and the deserts, and civil war crept in. You had heroes, Yasmina said, but you also had all kinds of armed criminals, running around all over. The first were fighting the French, while the second were robbing the people. In the south, at the edge of the Sahara, you had the heroes such as Al-Hiba, and later his brother, who resisted until 1934. In my region, the Atlas, the proud Muha on Hemuziyadi, kept the French army at bay until 1920. In the north, the prince of the fighters, Abdelkrim, gave the French and the Spanish a real beating until they ganged him up and defeated him in 1926. But also, during all this turmoil, little girls were being stolen from their poor parents in the mountains and sold in the big cities to rich men. It was standard practice. Your grandfather was a nice man, but he bought slaves. It was the natural thing to do back then. Now he has changed, and like most of the notables in the big cities, he supports the nationalists' ideals, including respect for the individual, monogamy, the abolition of slavery, and so on. Yet, strangely enough, we co-wives feel closer to one another than ever. Although those who were slaves among us have tried to track down and contact their original families, we feel like sisters. Our real family is the one that we have woven around your grandfather. I could even imagine changing my mind about Lella Tor if she ever stopped looking down on all of us because we don't have tiaras. Naming the duck Lella Tor was Yasmina's way of participating in the creation of the beautiful new Morocco, the Morocco that I, her little granddaughter, was going to step into. Morocco has changed quickly, little girl, she often told me, and it will keep doing so. That prediction made me feel happy. I was going to grow up in a wonderful kingdom where women had rights, including the freedom to snuggle up their own husband every night. But even though Yasmina lamented having to wait 8 nights for her husband, she added that she could not complain too much, because the wives of Harun Rashid, the Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad, each had to wait 999 nights before for he had 1,000 jariyas or slave girls. To wait 8 nights is not like waiting 999 nights, she said. That is almost 3 years. So things are getting better. Soon we will have one man, one wife. Let's go feed the birds. We'll have lots of time later to talk more about harems. And then we would rush to her garden to feed the birds.